to the This Gal Travels podcast, the show that helps you travel more, travel easier, and travel better. I'm Trina, and today I am talking about how not to be an ugly traveler. My best pro traveler tip is at the end of the show, so make sure you listen all the way through. While the term ugly traveler might have originally spawned from the ugly American traveling abroad, because Americans had a reputation for not necessarily being the most considerate and sensitive of travelers. Nowadays, you can find ugly travelers of any nationality. And there are some that have an extra reputation, and I'm not going to mention them, but there are some that have a little extra reputation that really puts them in the what would have been at one time the ugly American category. I think some Americans have gotten better. I think a lot of Americans have gotten better. But let me read to you, this is a definition I wrote for an ugly traveler a long time, a few years back. So I have an ugly traveler as someone, any person who visits a foreign country, views it only through their homeland's lens, refuses to learn or participate in local customs, and generally shares their self-inflicted displeasure with everyone around them. Okay, so that's the definition of an ugly traveler. And of course, we all try not to be ugly travelers. And if you've listened to any of my other podcasts, you'll know that, my philosophies, if you are along the lines of my philosophies, the answer is usually be kind. That's one of the first answers. But that doesn't mean we don't make mistakes. So that's what this podcast is about, is we're going to look at things that maybe you're doing it unintentionally, but to just make sure that you're not being an ugly traveler or that your traveling companions aren't being ugly travelers. So let's take a look. The first thing when you travel is don't expect things to be like home, and don't complain when they're not like home. You know, I know sometimes travel can be stressful. And you're getting there and you're tired, and especially when you're going somewhere that's really foreign. And, after a little while, maybe you're just, it's getting to you and you're not used to things being so foreign, and the food is foreign, and you're having trouble communicating, and all these little things are going wrong, and you can't read the signs. And sometimes you just want things to be easy, and you're getting frustrated because you weren't quite prepared for how different the place was. And so you complain because things aren't like home. Well, they do this wrong, and they do that wrong, and they do this that way, and that way, and you start complaining. And the problem with that, of course, is that one complaint, okay, yeah, I prefer observations. I don't mind if someone observes, oh, hey, they do this differently here. That's not a complaint. But you have one complaint, and then another, and another, and then you are just complaining all the time, and that brings everyone around you down. Okay, and whether it's fellow travelers or the hotel staff or just your travel, as I say, your travel companion. So try not to complain about everything just because it's different. The better thing to do, honestly, is instead of seeing everything that's different as an annoyance, see it as a newness, as a discovery, okay? So reframe it from, oh, that's annoying because it's not what I know, to, oh, wow, look at the way they do that. And just that reframing could alleviate some of the stress you're feeling, okay? And you don't have to love everything a place does. You don't have to love everything about a new place, but do try and observe before you start complaining. And I will be honest with you, you should know that sometimes things are different simply because it is a different place, and not only is it a materials available, but it may be things are done differently because they have an environmental situation that requires something different from what your home environmental situation. I mentioned that with things like in Southeast Asia, they have stairs everywhere, and I think a lot of that has to do with the heavy rains they get. So you might complain about the fact that there's 3 or 4 stairs into everywhere, practically. And you might not realize that there might be a really good reason for that. So withhold your judgment. try and turn it into a positive, and try not to complain too much. Next item is don't get upset when people don't speak your language. And this is probably most for English speakers, but it could be any nationality. And I say that because, you're in someone else's country, and you cannot expect them to bend over backwards and adapt to your language. There are places where you will find that, like I'm here in Ghana, and a lot of people here, not only they speak their local tribal language, they speak English because that's what they teach in schools, and they often will speak several local languages. And I have one friend who he does that, and he speaks a few European languages too. Okay, so you'll find that a lot of these people are multilingual, but so their English may not be perfect, or they may not speak English at all. If I go out to villages, then there's like no English at all. Sometimes you just barely get out into the country, get away from the cities a little bit, and the amount of English is going to drop. And you might be in a place where really English just doesn't exist, okay? Where it's really hard to find people to speak English. The thing is, that's not their problem, okay? And the truth is, nowadays, there's an easy solution. If you're frustrated by the language situation, there is an easy solution, and that is simply, first of all, Google Translate or whatever your favorite translation app is. And make sure you download the language onto your phone. Don't just, assume you're going to have access. Download the language so you have it offline. And I have a whole podcast episode on how to deal with language when you don't speak the language, how to deal with communication when you don't speak the language. So this is just the condensed version, but I will put a link to that episode in the description. But so you start with Google Translate. However, like here in Ghana, it's either English or it's a local language, and I think Google Translate might have one of the languages, the local languages here, in its database, but then it's not even a spoken version of it. So some places, even that's not going to help. But if you can, at least if it's a common language, more common than a African dialect, take a little Duolingo, get on Duolingo and learn the first few lessons if you can. It's not that hard, it's pretty easy, and you can at least learn the basic greetings. Okay, so having said that, the other thing, of course, is be ready to draw a picture, be ready to pull up a picture on your phone, be ready to mime, to play charades, I should say, not mime, but play charades. And just think that there are so many ways to communicate that don't have to do with language. And as I say, I got to refer you to that episode because there are so many ways I've had full conversations with people and not had any actual words exchanged. We didn't understand any words of the other person's language at all. So whatever you do, if you're in someone else's country, absolutely do not get upset if they don't speak your language. And you should apply these other tactics to make communication easier, because it's really not that hard to do. The next thing you want to avoid to make sure you're not being an ugly traveler is don't tell people what's wrong with their country, right? You don't want someone coming to your country and telling you everything that's wrong with it. It might be okay if you say what's wrong with it, but you don't want them saying what's wrong with it. Don't go somewhere and tell people what is wrong with their country. No country is perfect. Your country is not the best. It is not better than everyone else on every aspect. No place is perfect. And as I mentioned, some of the things that are different, you might not understand why they're different. You really might not. There might be a reason for the way they do things that you haven't seen. Okay? And honestly, it's just rude. Some people, they'll think that their country is so great that if it's not done like it is at home, that you must be doing it wrong. And that's just not the case. Everywhere has different philosophies and different issues, and that's one of the wonderful things about the whole planet is everywhere is different. But you have to leave room for it to be different, and you have to leave that my place is best, arrogance, leave it at home. Okay, you can be proud of your home, but just remember, everywhere needs to be what it is, and it doesn't mean that any place doesn't have room for improvement. Every place has room for improvement, but as a visitor, you just don't have the information you need to be telling someone what's wrong with their country. Honestly, the better thing to do, especially if you meet up with someone that you feel like you could have a nice, deep conversation with, is talk to them about it. Instead of saying, well, I think you should do this, sit there and say, you know, I find it curious that you do this way. Is there a reason for it? And open a discussion and try and learn something about it. Still don't pass judgment, but try and learn something about the problems and why they are the way they are. And then at least, if you walk away with a certain opinion, it'll be at least a little bit better informed. And if you ever find yourself tempted to say, well, you know, when they say, well, we have this problem with this, and you say, well, they should just, as soon as you use that word just, probably means you don't understand the full situation. Well, they should just move away from the crocodiles. It's like, yeah, like a whole village can just get up and move after it's been there for hundreds of years, you know? So you've got to listen. Do more listening than telling. Now, the next item on the list is another one I've done an entire podcast on. Okay, so I'm going to put that link in here too. And it's on basically, don't be an ugly traveler. Don't over haggle. Okay? Don't negotiate, and I say negotiate, don't haggle to the point where you are, you know, grinding the person down, and the last bit, the last tiny number, and you find out that you are complaining about over a dime, okay, or a quarter, or some small amount of money, and you're sitting there so insisting on the local price that you're just being a jerk about it. First off, remember, if you're coming to a place, and this goes for Southeast Asia, this goes for a lot of Central and South America, not all of it, I'm not saying every country, but it goes for a lot of Africa. If you are from a Western country, you know, and your money is going very far in the country you're visiting, okay? Let's say, you know, you're somewhere where you can buy lunch for $1, and that's awesome. You know, and I mean a good lunch. I'm not talking about some fast food dollar menu. I'm talking a good lunch. If you're in a place like that and you're choosing to haggle, haggling is fine. I'll tell you the right way to do it in a minute. But you got to remember this. I know you don't want to get ripped off, but even if you saved for 2 or 3 years to get on this trip and you're on a shoestring budget, you have just enough money to make your trip around the country, and you could be on the tightest budget you can imagine, and you are still better off than a large portion of the population here. The fact that you can even take off a couple of weeks from your job, and you have enough extra money that you've been able to save so that you could pay for that plane ticket, and that you can wander around and enjoy whatever wonderful country you're in for a week or 2 or 3. You're rich, you know. You're doing very well compared to the average person in this country, whichever country you're in. And obviously, if you're traveling in the US or Europe, it's a little different story, but there's less haggling going on there. So if you start haggling, and then, you know, as I say, if you start grinding it and you've got to win the haggle, you've got to get the best of them, and you know, you're getting down to, you know, oh wow, you beat them by a quarter. You're being an ugly traveler, okay? Don't do it. I made the mistake once, and I was naive, and I thought I should get the local price, and I assumed that they were pushing it, and I was wrong. Flat out, I was wrong. I wasn't nasty, but I did over haggle it. I flat out over haggled. And that was like my first trip solo. Well, it wasn't a solo trip, but it was my first trip, one of my first trips abroad. And I just got on that, I want to get the price of a local. And just know that you're not going to get, sometimes you'll get the local price. Some things you buy, People are just going to give you the same price they give the locals. And some are going to bump it a little bit. As long as you get your price close, it's fine. Okay? So as I say, I have a whole episode on haggling, and I will link it. But general rule of thumb is the best thing you can do is know the price before you start haggling. Know approximately what it should be. If you are going out and you're going shopping, then ask the people at the hotel, hey, how much should this thing I want to buy? About how much should it cost? Okay, that's one of your that's your best defense against getting ripped off. Okay, also know that sometimes you are going to get ripped off. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes you get bamboozled by someone, whether it's a vendor or a driver. Sometimes it happens. If it happens, don't dwell on it. Let it go. Let it go, and just assume that they needed some money and the universe delivered it to them via you. Sometimes that happens. But when you approach a haggle, do it in good nature. There are some cultures, and you got to pay attention to the culture. There are some cultures that haggle really hard, so they start high and they expect you to haggle. And then there are some that leave a little room, but if you try to haggle really hard like you did in this other culture over here, they may not even listen to you over there. So understand the cultural differences in haggling. And again, ask if you have a guide, if you have or at the hotel, go ahead and ask someone kind of how they would handle it. But treat haggling more as a game, as an entertainment, okay? Just approach it with a good attitude and that you're trying to get both sides to win. This is not a competition for you to win, okay? But I will say one thing. There are times when someone's just going to flat out try and rip you off, and they're going to think you're just stupid tourist, and they're going to try and rip you off. With those people, if you even choose to deal with them, you might just walk away from them. But if you choose to deal with them, haggle as hard as you want. If they're treating you like an idiot, haggle as hard as you want. At the point where they're being rude to you because they're being so bad on their pricing that it's disrespectful, and that, like, when you call them on it, they try to say, no, that's the real price, and you know better. Haggle as hard as you want if you don't just walk away. But other than that, if the people are haggling in good faith, you haggle in good faith. The next one's easy, kind of short and sweet, but don't get stupid drunk. Just don't get stupid drunk. And especially out in public, don't make someone else responsible for taking care of you when you are drunk. One, you're inviting someone of nefarious ideas to do something to you, to rob you or some such thing. So don't leave that opening there. Don't let that happen. And then also, if someone is looking out for you, you don't want to have to tend drunk. So don't make someone else tend you when you're drunk. Okay? Go ahead, go out, go to clubs, do whatever you want and party, and just keep it in moderation. Okay? Keep it in moderation, keep your wits about you, and don't make yourself a target, and don't burden others with your drinking. Fair enough? Okay, let's move on to the next one. This one is especially for Americans because it's something that we are known for. But don't be that loud, boisterous person who just barrels into a room and, you go to shake someone's hand and you give the really firm handshake, or you hug someone that isn't invited, and, just generally impose that forceful personality, shall we say, onto people, especially if you haven't met them yet. Okay? And again, this is a little bit of a cultural shift, but don't just assume that. I will tell you, pretty much everywhere I have been, the standard American handshake is way too firm. The one you use in business, way too firm. I have shaken so many hands that it is sometimes it's moderate. Some people come at you and it's moderate, but it's still way toned down from your average American handshake. And I've had so many people where the handshake is extremely light. Okay, So no bone-crushing handshakes, not even a business firm American-style handshake. Lighten your handshake and match what the other person is doing. Don't just assume that the powerful American handshake is the way to greet people. Okay, now, as far as volume, it really depends on where you are. Okay, in Asia, they can get loud, okay? I have seen Asians get loud. However, it's not on first meeting, and not unless you know the person would be my recommendation. So when you come into a new situation, match their volume, okay? If you are a loud person, I will say you're gonna have a lot less trouble if you come to Africa. Ghana is not a quiet place. We stayed at a place in Accra that was in the Osu neighborhood. And oh man, you could always hear people talking down on the street. And that there are times when people over here are having conversations. And I have no idea if they are arguing, if they are talking about last night's football game, or having some philosophical conversation. Honestly, sometimes I just can't tell if they're, up here and angry because they talk loud. And so, yeah, if you're a loud person, you're going to have no problem in Africa in general. If there is, tell me this. If you're an experienced traveler and you've been around Africa, have you been to an African country where the people are quiet on a regular basis, where that's their normal mode of being? I would love to know if there is an African country that suits that, because I've been to about 13 African countries, I think it is. And I don't remember any of them being particularly quiet. Actually, leave it in the comments if you know of a country that you've been to that you have found to be particularly loud or particularly quiet. I would really love to know. Let's get a list going and compare notes. But the key here to not be an ugly traveler is to simply pay attention, watch what the other people are doing, match what the other people are doing until you get to know them and or the culture better. I like this next one because you can actually see it in action at home. Depending on where you live, you might be able to observe this in your home city. So this one is simply, don't get angry when systems in the country you're visiting don't work like you think they do, or don't work like they do in your home country. Okay, let's take buses. Everyone's ridden a bus at some point in time, right? Even if it's all the way back to your school bus, although this is a little different than a school bus. But say you've ridden a bus and you ride the bus once in a while in your home city, and you know how buses work. All buses are the same. You know how buses work. Well, maybe you do, maybe you don't. You get to a new country and maybe it's not, you have your ticket beforehand, especially if you're buying your ticket online and you shows a little QR code or something like that. Honestly, I haven't ridden a bus in the US in a long time. Last time I was on a bus, it was you dropped your change in. But whether you drop your change in or you buy a ticket ahead, some countries don't work like that. Some countries, you get to the bus station and it's this chaotic mess. It seems like a mess, but you got people yelling over here where they're going, and this bus over here is yelling out where they're going because they're trying to fill up their buses. And to be honest, they don't leave. Some of the times, buses don't leave until they're full. Okay, so you can get there and you can get on your bus, and it's not going to leave until it's full. And some of them might sell you a little ticket over at a little desk, and literally just a little table sitting there, and they've got a little ticket, and then it might be a separate charge for your luggage. This gets you on the bus, but then you got to pay the guy a little bit to take your luggage. Or it might be a situation where you find the bus you're looking for, and sometimes it's, I've been in a place where I couldn't read the signs, or I was actually learning the language a little bit, and I hadn't learned a lot of it, but I'm like, I think that's the syllable for that. And so you stick your head in. If you're not sure where it goes, you stick your head in and you're like, Mendefera, and if they say yes, you get on, and if they say no, you go check the next bus. But you get on the bus, and it starts going, and you assume and hope you're going the right direction. But they don't take your money until the bus is moving and it's on its way, and then the first mate comes around and takes your money and gives you a ticket. But that doesn't happen until you're en route, you know. There's the bus company here, the state bus company. If you're late, if you're not showing up for the bus, because you have to get your ticket ahead and give your phone number and your name and all that when you buy the ticket, they'll call you and they're going to be like, "Are you coming?" They will literally call you and check if you are running late, because they want to know if they can leave. If you're like 5 minutes away, they will wait for you. You know, they'll be like, "Okay, get here quick," you know. And, you know, Africa's known for buses not running on time, and or not buses, but life is slower here. There is a thing called Africa time, and that's just the way it is. There was one guy who had been in Ghana for like a month or two, and he asked about the bus schedule because he thought it was a nonstop to Accra, and he actually timed it and was counting on it so he could get to the airport that night because he was going home. And this was a European gentleman, and he was a little bit. He wasn't angry. I will say this. He was not an ugly traveler because he wasn't getting angry about this. He was a little anxious that there were actually stops along the way. He had asked if it was nonstop, and they said yes, but I don't know if it was a communication problem or just a misunderstanding of what nonstop really meant. He kind of should have known it wasn't nonstop. I don't think there's such thing as a nonstop bus here in Ghana. But he was getting a little anxious, and actually the traffic got tied up, and he actually got out of the bus early before we got back to the station, and then caught a cab to the airport. So it all worked out. He was fine. He had enough time. And as I say, for as much as he got a little anxious and he made a little misjudgment, he did not get angry. Okay, see, that's the difference. Something can happen and it might bother you a little bit, but it's when you get angry and you either complain a lot or you lash out, and that's when someone starts turning into an ugly traveler. And so I will give him absolute points. He did not, he was a little frustrated with the miscommunication, but he was not angry, and he was not ranting about them, as I say. So he gets points for that. Oh, but the part of this that you might be able to observe at home depends on, as I say, it depends on where you live. But the trick here, first, let me tell you the solution, and I'm going to tell you something you can observe at home. What you need to do is you need to adjust your expectations and just recognize when you're in another country, things might not work the way you think they do. In fact, assume they don't, and ask questions and ask for help. You might even preemptively ask questions and ask for help on the assumption that you don't know how it works. And here's a good example. If you go to an Asian restaurant, I've seen this happen in Chinese restaurants, and I've seen it happen in a Vietnamese restaurant. And this is in the US. But it happens when you're there too, when you're in those countries. And you go to a restaurant and they get your order, and then they bring your food, and then you never see a waiter again. And you might be thinking this is really bad service. The thing is, they don't want to interrupt your meal. They don't want to disturb you and interrupt your meal. What you'll probably notice is that they're probably stationed around the thing, and you can flag anyone down. That's not always a specific table, but you can flag anyone down and say, "Hey, can I get some whatever? Can I get some soy sauce?" It's not bad service, though. That's the way they do service, but from an American point of view, that might be considered bad service. But as I say, it's not. And so that same thing applies when you're in that country. As I say, that's something that you can observe at home if you have certain types of Asian restaurants in your neighborhood. And they might have, you might have a place that does it the American way. But if you go to a restaurant like that and you feel like you're being ignored, just know that you can flag someone down. But that's the kind of custom that you might not realize is normal in a country, and you might misinterpret it. So this is why I say ask. If you're not sure how a system works, ask. Oh, and today you are going to get an extra pro traveler tip. I'm going to give you one right now. And that is simply, do not overschedule your day. When you are planning your travels, do not overschedule your day, because things are going to go wrong. Things are going to happen that will delay you in ways that you did not foresee. It might be a trotro breaking down, and it might be a herd of goats blocking the road. You can tell what kind of places I travel in, huh? But when you're scheduling your trip, when you're planning your trip, leave room for life to happen, okay? Leave space in the day for life to happen. So that's the extra pro traveler tip, but I have another one for you at the end as well. By the way, if you are enjoying this podcast, don't forget to subscribe. And if you know someone that might benefit from hearing this particular episode, feel free to share it around. Okay, the next thing that you don't want to do if you don't want to be an ugly traveler is don't dress inappropriately for the culture you're visiting. If you are visiting a place where people are a little bit more conservative, do not wear booty shorts and a tank top with spaghetti straps and think it's completely fine. And honestly, tank top and shorts may not be appropriate for guys either. This is not just an imposition on women. In a more conservative culture, they generally do not dress like that. Okay, and don't say, well, I want to be comfortable and I'm going to dress the way I want because freedom. And it's like, you know what? You're going to their country. Be respectful. Don't be so into yourself that you disrespect the culture you're visiting. What you want to do is you want to find out what is appropriate attire and make sure you have plenty of that in your suitcase. Pack according to the destination you're visiting. Because you're an outsider, you will be given some slack in most cases. Now, I can't say every country, but in a lot of countries, you will be given some slack because you're an outsider. But just don't abuse that. I know I keep using Ghana, but that's because it's where I'm stationed right now, and I have a lot of examples. But normally, honestly, adults don't really wear shorts here. They'll wear them into their teens, kind of, but adults don't wear shorts. However, I wear shorts every day. And I get a little slack because I'm an outsider. And honestly, I'm up here in the northern part of Ghana, and it's extra hot. And they know it's hot for me. So they give me some slack because of that. Also, my shorts come to just above my knee. There's nothing immodest about my shorts in any way, shape, or form. So no one minds me wearing shorts. In fact, I have a tattoo just below my knee, and that gets all sorts of cool attention. They like my tattoo. So as I say, you can use a little flex there. And I will say there are some places where the country might be pretty darn conservative, but they know that at the beach resort that Westerners are going to be wearing bikinis and that sort of thing. But if you're in a place like that, keep it at the resort, keep it at the whatever tourist spot it is, where you can be a little more showy, shall we say. And but once you leave that area, cover up, to an appropriate level. And it's not that you have to cover up super much. If I were somewhere more conservative and I didn't want to wear shorts, simply pants and short sleeves. There's nothing wrong with that. But you don't have to go overboard. You don't have to go super mega conservative. Now, some places you might, there are some countries that have traditions, because I know if you visit Iran, women have to cover their hair. I know they're having those protests, but as a tourist, you do not want to be part of those protests. So, you really need to pay attention to the culture you're visiting and respect their cultural norms when it comes to how you dress. And I will say this, and this is true across a lot of religions. It can be Buddhist temples, it can be a church, it can be, I don't know about synagogues. They might have a dress code. Mosques will have dress codes. There are Hindu temples might have dress codes as well, and they don't all have dress codes, but if you go to a place, and especially this is where a little research in your guidebook goes well, that some of the places, especially the tourist visited ones, they're going to ask you to not have bare shoulders and, maybe not bare knees at all, like my shorts. There are places I would not wear the shorts because it's a religious place. And even though, as I say, they're not immodest, but in certain religious settings, they're not appropriate either. So there's two possibilities. One, they'll say, hey, you can't come in if you're not dressed appropriately, go home, put something on. Or they might have someone that can rent you a cover-up, and you'll have to pay a few dollars for it, of course. And I mean, maybe some of them have a no-charge one, but a lot of them, someone will be there and they'll rent you some sort of cover-up that'll allow you to go into the event, but don't count on that. If you're going to any sort of religious place, check it out before you go and find out if there's a little bit of a dress code and abide by it before you get there. The next one is another one that I have done an entire episode on. Okay, that's another link for the description. And the key here is don't turn your nose up at local foods. Okay, and right now I'm going to tell you my philosophy is try everything. Okay, try everything. But if you're not a person that's really good at trying foods, at the very least, don't be rude about turning it down. Don't look at someone's food and scrunch your nose and give it a dirty look. And don't assume street food is dirty or unclean or dangerous. Most street food is completely fine. Okay, so don't do something like, ooh, I wouldn't eat street food. And don't give attitude about street food. Don't give attitude just because something doesn't look appetizing to you. My best rule is try everything, but even if you don't want to, just don't turn ugly and be rude about it. That is someone's food. That is it's probably, in fact, I can almost guarantee in many cases, it's homemade, it's handmade. And for you to disparage it, especially without trying it, I mean, to just disparage it because you don't like the way it looks, no, don't do that. If you look at something and it doesn't appeal to you, you can just sit there and say, no, I don't think that's for me right now. Okay, decline, modestly. And the thing is, this is another thing to know. If you try a local food, especially a really unique one, and they know which ones, are off-putting for Westerners. But if you try a local food, one, you're going to get points for trying it. You're going to get points that you were even brave enough to try their super local food at all. And if you end up not liking it, if you need to spit it out, do so discreetly, get rid of it discreetly. But just know that by trying it, you've already earned points. And if you really can't handle it, they'll understand. For the most part, 9 times out of 10, they will understand, and you will get slack simply because you were willing to try it. Okay? So if you have to spit it out, try and be very subtle and or polite about it. If you can just swallow it, go ahead. And, if you inadvertently make a face once you've put the food in your mouth and your face kind of scrunches up because you just really don't like the flavor, that's more forgivable because you're not doing it intentionally. It's not an expression. It was a reaction, but not an expression. But know that by trying to, in fact, in many cultures, that's just going to get a laugh. If you're the foreigner trying the local food and you really don't like it and you end up making a face, most of the time that's going to get laughed off. So don't sweat that too much. Don't worry that you might offend by trying it and not liking it. Because, as I say, you'll have the cred for even trying it. And most of the time, as I say, even if you don't like it, you'll be fine. But yeah, I have a whole episode with full details on trying foods and all sorts of things you need to know. So I will definitely link that in the description as well. This one's going to be full of links. If you don't want to be an ugly traveler, don't ignore local customs. Okay? Don't just assume that your version of etiquette and protocol is what it should be everywhere. Pay attention to local customs. And you might not know all of them right off. In fact, I guarantee you're not going to know all of them right off. And once again, you're an outsider, you're a tourist, you're going to be given some slack. But you want to learn them, the most important ones, as soon as you can. If you are in a place where people bow, go ahead and bow and find out the rules, how deep you bow and who bows to whom, who bows first. If there's almost always an age element to that, or a level of importance, if it's seniority in a company. Hopefully, if you're going on a business trip, you've been briefed on that sort of interaction. If you're somewhere where they remove their shoes going into the house, be sure to remove your shoes, or ask at least. Tim was not good in sandals. He was not good at wearing sandals, and so he always had lace-up shoes, and because of his difficulties moving around, most people did not mind him wearing shoes in their house. They understood there was a reason. But most of the time, if they remove their shoes, you remove your shoes. And if you are somewhere where they have a right-hand culture, which means you eat with your right hand, it goes for everything in the culture. It's always the right hand, by the way. This is the good hand, the clean hand. It's always the right hand. Anything you bring to your mouth is with the right hand. And anytime you shake someone's hand or interact with them in any way, it's the right hand. Left hand does not get used for that sort of thing. If you are passing money, it is with the right hand. All interactions are with the right hand. You'll actually get good at holding the bills between these two fingers. You'll have your bills here and you'll take a bag from someone and hand over the cash at the same time. That's a skill you'll get to if you spend much time in a country where you have the right-handed thing. Whatever, or you can do it with coins too, but where you get the handoff technique going on. So yeah, and if you make, I made a mistake once because my hands were full. I just forgot about the right hand thing, and my hands were full, and I handed a woman money with the left hand, and she was a little bit more of a country, rural type situation, and she was pretty offended. And fortunately, the driver we had at the time kind of smoothed things over for me. And I felt bad because it was my mistake. It was entirely my mistake. And, so the trick with the right hand thing is take your time. And if you need to take something from someone, transfer it to your left hand to hold it, and then continue your interaction. Take the time to do it. They will complete, it's normal. But yeah, you might need to transfer hands with things, but keep it at the right hand. So those are a few of the basics, but you need to do some understanding and research for whatever culture you are visiting. I'd say do a quick Google at least of what are some cultural mistakes people make in X country, whatever country you're going to. And try and learn just a little bit before you get there. And definitely once you get there, ask. Don't hesitate to ask. People are happy to tell you about their culture. So whenever you're not understanding something, don't hesitate to ask. This next one is important. When you're traveling, don't be so serious and get upset every time something goes wrong. Okay? Don't get upset when things take longer than you expected or don't go the way you think they should. There are times when it's upsetting, but if you're getting angry all the time, this is wrong, that is wrong. I'm going to tell you right now, when you're traveling, almost nothing goes as planned. If everything goes as planned, that's the day you should go buy a lottery ticket if you can. But seriously, just assume things aren't going to go exactly the way you expected them to. And that actually takes some of the pressure off. But yeah, don't get upset at every little thing. Okay? As I say, don't get upset when it's not the way you expected. Don't get upset when things take longer. Be patient. I will say that when we did our trip to China, and this was 2007, We were having a great time. It was a good trip. There was one day out of the whole trip, 6 weeks, there was one day where everything went wrong. And I'll admit, I mostly held it in. Tim knew I was ready to fall apart. It was things had been happening all day. It was hot. There was construction on the mountain, and so they were only we didn't know what was going on at the time, but they were only letting traffic up or down for like in 2-hour or 3-hour blocks. And so we were sitting there and didn't know why we were just sitting there. And we didn't have enough language to ask and understand to get it explained to us. And then we get to the bus station, and all the guys with the taxis were really pushy. And then I picked this nice young woman because she wasn't pushy, and her uncle, who we figured out was her security, but he looked like a thug. And, he's riding in the back, and we're not sure who he is, so we're not quite sure how safe this ride is, but there were 2 of us there, so, and then she's driving and she's doing absolutely nothing wrong, but there's this hedgerow in the road, and this guy on a bicycle comes flying out, and bam, she smacks into him. I think he got out of it with like a broken leg, but it was completely his fault. But then, so the police come, and then we get escorted to the side of the road after a while, and they say, we're going to get you a taxi, but they don't get us a taxi. And then I try and flag down a taxi, and it's somewhere in there, Tim was going to put his arm around me and make me feel better. I'm like, no, don't do that, because if you do, I'm going to cry. And I did not want to break down on the street in China crying, and I'm sure we hadn't eaten enough at this point, because we might have had a snack or something, but I'm sure we hadn't eaten enough for the day, because this was hours and hours and hours. And so we go to flag down a cab, and no one is stopping. And then this young man finally comes up to us, and he's like college age, and they were very big on practicing English. So he was happy to talk to us. And he explained, well, the cabs only stop at certain points. This was new. None of the other cities we had been to were like this, but they only stop at the taxi stands that are at most corners. And so that was a nice explanation. And then he walked with us till almost to the hotel, and he's like, okay, your hotel's just down there. And then we get to the hotel, and at the time this was pre-smartphone and all that, so I hadn't reserved the room or anything. So the only room they had was their most expensive. I went and looked at it, because it was not that expensive, but it was more expensive than we wanted to go, and the room really just wasn't worth it. It's like, I can't justify staying here. And then they had a sister hotel, and they reserved a room for us. They got us like the last room. They were really nice, and that was great. And we start walking over, and it starts raining. Dragging the luggage, and it starts raining. And all this time, I'm holding it in, and I'm ready to fall apart on every level. And the only person who paid the price for this, and this was actually a silent thing, but in the rain, this car comes up, and he came up. We had the light. We were crossing the street with the light. It was completely our right of way. And this guy pulls up, and he pulls up aggressively, too close, and I turned and I looked at him, and the look I gave him, I am surprised his face didn't melt. It was like the whole day got focused on this driver, and he actually did look kind of stunned and sort of pale, because all the frustrations of the day got to me. And that was the one, Tim said that I was radiating so much heat at that point that the rain wasn't even touching me. It was just, kind of bouncing off of this aura of heat around me and little bits of steam. And so we get to the other hotel, and they were so kind. They're like, sit down, relax. They took our luggage up. They gave us drinks. They turned the fans on us. And they just took care of us beautifully, and it all melted away. And I slept so hard that night. And I'm telling you all this because it's kind of funny. It's a funny story. And also because, you're going to have a bad day, but try not to inflict it on everyone else. All that. And I really tried not to inflict it. I sort of melted the driver, but that was it, and most of the time, try and be patient and understanding, and just understand that things happen differently there, okay? That was an accumulation, but any other day I would have said, oh yeah, okay, the taxi thing, I just didn't understand that. Not a problem, we'll fix it. But on top of everything else, it just did me in. One example of ugly travelers, this was in China, in the China trip, but we were up in the mountainous region. I want to say Songpan, but I think we were higher. I think it was one notch higher than Songpan. We were in a mountainous region. We were at like 11,000 feet. That's like 3,300 meters, okay, for you metric types. And this was a little two-street town. You want to say one-horse town? That's about right, except we went up there to ride horses, so they had a lot more than one horse. But this town had like two streets to it. And so we were there, and we went to this restaurant, and they were reputed to have like the best high-altitude chocolate cake you could possibly have. Well, there was a group of travelers. I'm not going to say the country. I don't want to shame anyone. But there was a group of travelers there from a particular country, not the U.S., and they had ordered the chocolate cake before we did, and the chocolate cake took a long time. Okay, at 11,000 feet, if you know anything about baking at all, you know it's pretty much impossible to bake at that kind of altitude. It's difficult to bake at just a few thousand feet. It was taking a long time, and they had a big party, and so they had a lot of them. And first they're complaining the whole time about it taking too long. And then when it comes, all they could do was complain about it. Now, I'll tell you what the cake was like in just a minute, because it was unique, shall we say. But as I say, you have to comprehend 11,000 feet. That is crazy for baking. And by the way, the same little restaurant, privately owned, of course, and she made a great skillet apple pie. The skillet apple pie was aces. The chocolate cake was unique. It was a little odd, and I admit that. But, she has just been working her butt off to get these things made for you, and all you can do is complain. All this group did was complain. They complained about the time. They complained about the condition of the chocolate cake, and they were we just sat there and we thought, what jerks. Even if they didn't like it, they should have kept their mouths shut, okay? And if they were concerned about the time, I mean, you're in a two-street town on the mountaintop in China. What are you in a hurry to get to, But they were just being ugly jerks, and that was really distasteful to witness. Now, I'll tell you, the chocolate cake, it actually, because there's no way for something to rise at that kind of altitude, it was actually a little bit more like a giant Pop-Tart. It seriously was like a giant homemade Pop-Tart. And it was fine. It tasted good. It's just limitations of the place. But as I say, in a way, that's what I mean. You have to set your expectations differently. So that's the way a chocolate cake comes out on the mountaintop. Then just accept it and enjoy it, And if nothing else, get a laugh out of it, but don't be ugly about it. And that goes for everything. When stuff happens that you don't expect or that you don't think it's the way it should go, try and step back, okay? Try and step back and say, hey, I'm in a different country. Things happen differently than I'm used to here, and I need to be prepared for it to go that way, to go a different way than I expect. So try and be patient. When you're traveling, bring your patience with you so you don't turn into an ugly traveler. Okay, today's pro traveler tip has 4 parts, and they all relate to ways that you can prevent turning into an ugly traveler. So you don't have those bad days, or you're less likely to have those bad days. So there's 4 parts to this. The first thing you want to do is get plenty of sleep. This will improve the level of your patience for when things don't go quite as expected. Okay, so get plenty of sleep, and especially your first couple of days, go to bed a little bit early, and if you need to, take a nap. if you're just tired, you're exhausted, take a nap. And that goes for any time during the trip, but especially the first couple of days. Okay, so get plenty of sleep. The next thing, stay hydrated, especially if you're traveling somewhere hot, but stay hydrated because you don't want to get fatigued and foggy-headed and headachy, and that's just going to make it really hard to tolerate those things that are a little bit different. So keep yourself at a good level of hydration. You don't have to go super crazy with it, but as I say, especially if you're in a hot climate, stay a little extra hydrated. Even if it's not a hot climate, still just keep yourself hydrated. You're probably going to be doing a lot more activity. You're going to be doing a lot of walking. Usually, I don't know about you, but I always end up walking a lot when I travel. And you're probably going to be doing a lot of walking, so keep yourself hydrated, and that's another thing that keeps your body on a good level. If your body's on a good level, you're going to have more patience and be less likely to turn into an ugly traveler. You see how this is all tying together here? Okay, and the next one ties into drinking, and that's eating. Eat plenty of food. Okay, when you're traveling, it's not the time to be on a diet. It is not the time to be cautious with your eating. Eat plenty of food. You are going to be expending more energy than normal. Don't worry about any extra you eat. You will burn it off. Okay? You do not want to get hangry. I am sure that day in China, probably that contributed a lot to my being ready to fall apart was because I'm sure I had not eaten enough for that entire day, because that whole adventure took the entire day. So definitely don't let yourself get hangry. Buy snacks if you need to. Stop and have a little snack somewhere. If you have to work in an extra small meal or just get a drink, whatever you need to do, just keep yourself well fed. And that goes on the airplane too. That's a little extra trick. Sometimes things get delayed and flights get delayed and all that, and you sometimes don't know when you're going to get fed again if you're in an airport or if a bus breaks down or anything like that. But especially the airport, when you're on an airplane, eat everything they bring you. Eat everything they bring you, because if there's any delays, you might get stuck somewhere where you can't get food. And you don't want to run yourself down when you're expending all that extra energy getting from one place to another. So keep yourself well fed, well hydrated, well fed, and sleep as much as you can. Sleep as much as you can on the plane, but get extra sleep when you arrive. One more thing. The most important thing to remember when you travel, and this is like an intergalactic rule, okay? This is for any traveler on any plane of existence. Don't panic. Some of you will get the reference. Don't panic. No matter what it seems like, most situations, are not as dire as they seem in the moment. And sometimes you need to just slow down, take a step back, and say, okay, what is a reasonable solution to this? And, if you can bring the temperature down, if there's anyone else involved, that'll help bring their temperature down as well. You bring your temperature down, it'll bring their temperature down. So whenever things start to go wrong, as I say, if the trotro breaks down, don't get upset. Pay attention to what everyone else is doing. If they're not panicking, you don't panic, okay? Just don't panic. And those are my tips for how not to be an ugly traveler. Thank you for joining me. I hope you have enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next time.